They already decided. Before you opened your mouth. Before you showed up. Before you even had the chance to be anything, they'd already filed you away in some drawer in their head, labeled it not a threat, and moved on with their very important lies. You know what I've noticed about people who underestimate others. They do it with such confidence, such breezy, unquestioned certainty. Like a man who walks past the same door every day and never once wonders what's behind it. It doesn't occur to him to wonder. He already knows it's nothing. He already knows you're nothing. And here's the part that makes me smile, really smile. They weren't even paying attention to you when they decided. You were just ambient, background noise. Someone at the edge of the frame who happened to be there when they were forming their impressions of the room. They looked at how you carried yourself, maybe. The job you had. The car you didn't have. The way you went quiet when louder people started talking. They ran you through their little formula. Inputs, outputs, conclusions. And out came weak. And the formula felt correct to them. It always does. People like formulas that confirm what they already suspect. So they said it. Directly or not. In meetings where your idea was overlooked. In rooms where the conversation started after you arrived, but felt like it was already finished. In the casual, almost gentle way people talk past someone they've quietly decided isn't worth talking to.
They thought you were weak. And here's where I get genuinely curious about you. You heard them, didn't you? Not with your ears.
With that deeper register, the one that picks up everything that isn't said out loud, but hangs in the air thick as smoke. You heard it. And something happened after that. That's the part I want to talk about. Let me tell you what that sounds like from the inside. You wake up, and the first thing your brain does, before coffee, before the light hits your face properly, is run a quiet audit, not a grand existential reckoning. Just this small automatic check. Am I still behind? Still less than? Still the version of myself that other people have decided I am? And the answer, most mornings, is yes. Still behind. Still the person in the waiting room while everyone else gets called in. You carry it efficiently. That's the thing nobody sees. You don't collapse under it. You've gotten quite good at calibrating the weight. You know how to be in rooms without taking up too much space. You've learned the exact volume at which to offer an opinion so it doesn't irritate anyone important. You've gotten skilled, genuinely skilled, at making your presence feel optional. Small, low stakes. And you did this because at some point, making yourself smaller felt safer than being seen and dismissed. Because dismissal is the particular cruelty of it. It's not hatred. Hatred would be almost flattering. Hatred would mean someone noticed you enough to feel something. Dismissal is the blank face. The politely redirected gaze. The conversation that pivots away from your contribution so smoothly that for a second you wonder if you actually spoke. You learned that early. Somewhere in the sequence of moments between childhood and now, you absorb the logic. Don't reach for something until you're sure you'll get it. Don't want things loudly. Don't take up space you haven't been assigned. And for a long time, you called that wisdom, strategy, being realistic. But wisdom doesn't make your stomach tight in meetings. Strategy doesn't make you rehearse things you want to say and then decide not to say them. Being realistic doesn't explain the 3 seconds you spend editing every message before you send it, sanding down the edges until it sounds like it. Was written by someone with nothing at stake. That's not wisdom. That's the residue of being underestimated for so long that you started doing their work for them. I know a man, very disciplined man, very committed to rules, who once spent years insisting that remaining invisible was the most powerful position he could occupy. He called it strategy, called it protecting something. I always thought it looked more like someone who'd been told his true face was too much to show, and had simply decided to agree. The memory makes me fonder of him than I expected. But back to you. Here's the part that actually interests me. Not the weight you carry, but what you've been doing with it. Because you didn't stop. That's the curious thing. Most people, when they've been cataloged as unimportant, take one of two paths. They either accept the catalog and arrange their life around it, or they perform furiously, loud, exhausting proof-seeking that looks more like drowning than winning. You know the type. You've watched them. The person who needs every room to know what they've accomplished before they've taken their coat off. You didn't do either. You got quiet. And you got to work. And while you were quietly working, the people who dismissed you were still very busy having opinions about you. Wasn't that generous of them? To keep forming conclusions about someone they decided wasn't worth observing. Carefully. They thought patience was passivity. They thought silence was emptiness. They thought that because you weren't performing your effort, weren't narrating it, branding it, making it visible and monetizable, that there was nothing there. They looked at the seed in the ground and declared confidently, "Nothing is growing here." So here is the question, underneath everything I've said. Not a gentle question, not the kind that makes you feel understood and comfortable. My kind. How long were you going to let them be right about you? Not because they were right, but because they were right, but because proving them wrong felt like it required a kind of self-belief you weren't sure you'd been authorized to claim. That's the thing you haven't asked yourself yet, but you've been circling it. Let me walk you through it now. Weak, interesting word. Let's take it apart. Weak is what people call things they don't understand the structure of. A rope looks weak until you understand the tension it was built to hold. A river looks weak until you live near the canyon it carved out over 2,000 years without anyone watching. What they diagnosed as weakness in you was almost certainly patience they couldn't maintain, restraint they'd never developed, or a kind of stillness that people who need constant feedback interpret as vacancy. Weakness has a very specific signature. It flinches. It caves under the first real pressure. It adjusts its position based on who's watching. Go back through the moments they called you weak and look at that signature. Did you flinch? Or did you simply not perform loudly enough for their particular standards of strength? There's a man I know who would never, under any circumstances, allow himself to be seen struggling. He turned composure into an identity. People called him strong. I called it a fascinating fear of being witnessed in an ordinary human moment, but they weren't wrong to admire the architecture, even if they misread what was holding it up. What they called your weakness was the discipline to absorb things without broadcasting every impact. That is not weakness. That is load-bearing. The word for that is structural. The label was wrong. It was always the wrong label. What they saw was the outside of something they were never patient enough to stay long enough to understand. Here's where this actually started. Not with you. Neve, with you. The people who decided you were weak did so because they needed a category for the parts of you that made them uncomfortable. Your quietness threatened people who need volume to feel legitimate. Your patience unsettled people who can't sit still long enough to think. Your refusal to perform your ambition was read as absence of ambition by people who cannot conceive of a desire that isn't visible and loud. People do not underestimate quietly. They underestimate through comparisons. And every comparison they ever made about you was built on the assumption that their version of strength was the correct one. That their tempo was the right tempo. That the way they occupied rooms was the way rooms were supposed to be occupied. They measured you with a ruler that wasn't made for you. And when the measurement came up short by their instrument, they concluded the problem was the thing being measured. This is how every system that has ever been wrong about a person worked. The underestimation was not a neutral observation. It was a failure of imagination dressed up as certainty. Now let's look at the people doing the estimating, because this is where it gets genuinely illuminating. What kind of person looks at someone quiet, patient, and working privately, and decides with confidence that they're seeing weakness? Someone who cannot imagine strength that doesn't announce itself. Someone whose own identity is tied so tightly to being perceived as capable that the idea of capable without audience doesn't register as real. Someone who has confused the map for the territory so long that they've forgotten there are territories the map doesn't cover. The person who underestimated you needed you to be small. That need says something. It says their architecture requires a hierarchy, and in that hierarchy, your elevation would mean something uncomfortable for their position. You know, I once watched a man, thoroughly principled, meticulous about his methods, who genuinely could not process the idea that someone might be building something significant in a direction he wasn't monitoring. Not because he was cruel, because his model of the world had rooms, and he'd assigned everyone to a room, and rooms didn't change. The people in his small category rooms stayed there. His certainty about that was, I'll admit, almost artistic. Their judgment of you tells you almost nothing about you. It tells you everything about the limits of their attention, the poverty of their imagination, and the specific shape of their insecurity. That's not bitterness. That's just looking clearly. Here is something they handed you without meaning to. When people underestimate you, they stop watching. And when they stop watching, they stop interfering. When they stop interfering, you get to work in the only environment that ever produced anything real, the one without an audience. Think about what you built during the years they weren't looking. Think about the skills you developed when you weren't distracted by their approval or their scrutiny. Think about the thinking you did, the problems you solved, the version of yourself you assembled in the quiet, while they were very busy having opinions and attending to their image. The people who were watched constantly had to manage the watching. You didn't. You had the extraordinary, underrated gift of being left alone to become something. They will eventually look up from their certainties and find you somewhere they didn't put you. That moment, not the recognition, but the recalibration on their face, is the only kind of proof worth waiting for. Not because you need it, but because it is the accurate conclusion to the argument they started without you. Invisibility, when chosen and used, rather than endured and apologized for, is the sharpest advantage a long game has ever had. There is a difference, a precise, important difference, between this trait as wound and this trait as weapon. The wound version looks like this. You're quiet because you've decided you don't deserve to take up space. You work in private because public effort feels dangerous. You're patient not out of strategy, but out of the exhaustion of someone who has stopped expecting things to change. In this version, the underestimation won. It moved in, it rearranged the furniture. The weapon version looks different. You're quiet because you've decided that not every room deserves your frequency. You work in private because you've noticed that private work is where the real architecture gets built, before it gets diluted by committee and noise. You're patient because you've developed the long view, and the long view is simply a more accurate map than the panicked short one. Same traits, completely different orientation. One looks like surrender, dressed up as peace. The other looks like strategy, dressed up as stillness. The question isn't whether you have this trait. You do. The question is which version of it you've been living in, and whether you've even noticed there was a choice. You can decide right now, not loudly, not with a speech or a statement, just the quiet interior shift of someone who has picked up a thing that was lying on the ground and decided to hold it correctly. That is the difference between a wound and a weapon. Not what it is, how you're holding it. The first thing you change is internal, not your behavior, your vocabulary. Your vocabulary, the specific words your brain uses when it talks to itself about what you are. Replace "I'm being overlooked" with "I'm not being interfered with." These are not the same thing. One is a passive experience of absence, something being done to you. The other is a conduct. Partition with tactical value, a room you get to work in undisturbed. Replace "I haven't proven myself yet" with "I'm in the build phase," and build phases don't need witnesses. Proof is for an audience. Building is for the structure. You are not behind. You are early. Replace. They don't see me, what they haven't looked where I'm actually working. This is not consolation. It is accurate. You know what you've been constructing while their attention was elsewhere. They don't. The gap between what they think and what's true is not your wound. It's your advantage. Words matter because they are the instructions your nervous system runs on. Tell yourself you're behind, and your body arranges itself around that story. Tell yourself you're in a build phase, with operational freedom, and your body arranges itself around that instead. The evidence outside hasn't changed, but the angle you're reading it from has. Some of the rooms you're in were designed, deliberately or not, to make your particular way of operating feel wrong. Rooms that reward volume over depth were not built for you. Rooms where the most performative person wins were not built for you. Rooms where value is measured by the size of your personality rather than the quality of your work. Those rooms have a specific gravity, and it pulls downward. You have probably felt that gravity. It's the feeling that something is wrong with you for not thriving in a place designed to disadvantage you. Identify those rooms, not to leave all of them immediately. Sometimes you have to be in rooms that don't fit because the world requires it. But know them. Know when you're in one, because the drain you feel there is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It's the predictable result of an environment misaligned with how you actually function. Look for the rooms where quiet work is valued, where results speak at a volume that matches your frequency, where the long game is legible. Those rooms exist. You've likely been so busy managing the wrong ones that you haven't looked for them with the same energy. Relationships, too. The people in your life who have absorbed the dismissal and started to reflect it back to you, who always seem mildly unsurprised when things go well for you, mildly comfortable when things are hard. Those people are a specific kind of environment. Audit them with the same clarity you'd apply to any room that was costing you more than it was returning. The next time someone underestimates you, in a meeting, in a conversation, in the particular silence that follows something you said that should have landed differently, here are 2 sentences. Internal. Not for them. First, that tells me they haven't been watching carefully. That's their information problem, not my reality problem. Second, I know what I'm building. I don't need them to see it yet to know it's real. That's it. No more. Do not compose a response that justifies yourself. Do not perform frustration so they know you noticed. The performance is for them. The certainty is yours. Keep it inside, where it operates most efficiently. Certainty that needs to be displayed isn't certainty. It's a request for confirmation. You're done requesting confirmation from people who've already told you how carefully they're looking. This is not a speech. You don't say this to anyone. You don't announce it. It is an interior posture, the specific way someone stands inside themselves when they have stopped apologizing for what they are. It sounds like this. I am not behind. I am in the correct phase for where I am. The timeline I'm on is mine, not a delayed version of someone else's. I work in the way that produces real things, not the way that produces the appearance of real things. I do not require witness for my to be valid. I have not been overlooked. I have been given operational freedom, and I have used it. What is coming will not look like what they expected. It will look like what I've actually built. Hold that, not like a mantra, not repetitively, desperately, as though you're trying to convince yourself. Hold it the way someone holds a thing they know is solid. You don't keep checking if a concrete wall is still there. You just know it is, and you act accordingly. This is the shift from apology to posture. It is quiet. It is immovable. And it is the last internal adjustment you need to make before the work does the rest of the talking. Here's what's actually true about you right now. Not what you wish were true. Not an aspiration, not a motivational frame to hang on your wall. What is actually true? You have been developing in conditions that would have made other people quit. Not because you're special. That's the story they tell in inspirational videos, and we don't tell those here. But because you made a specific choice, probably without recognizing it as a choice, to keep going when the external reward system had stopped acknowledging your inputs. To keep building when the audience had wandered off. To remain interested in your own development when the people around you had fully lost interest in it. That is not common. It is genuinely rare. Not heroic. I'm not interested in heroics. Just rare. The way accurate things are rare in a world that finds inaccurate things more comfortable. The system that underestimated you was not designed for the kind of player you are. It was designed for a faster visible, louder valued, performance-first model of human worth. And you didn't fit. And that non-fitting That particular friction, you felt your entire life between how you operate and how the room expects you to operate. That's not a flaw. It's a diagnostic. It's the system telling you that you are running on different specifications than the ones it was built to reward. Different specifications don't lose. Different specifications don't lose. They find the problem that everyone else was approaching wrong and solve it differently, in the timeline the problem actually requires, in the quiet that serious work actually demands. They thought you were weak. What they actually saw was someone playing a different game on a longer board than they had the patience to observe. And patience, real patience, the kind that doesn't collapse under the weight of other people's timelines, is the most quietly devastating competitive advantage on Earth. They are going to look up. Not because you'll demand it, not because you'll announce yourself, but because at some point, the gap between what they assumed and what is actually true will become too large to look past. When that moment arrives, you won't feel what they expect you to feel. You won't feel the need to say anything, because the person who needs to say something in that moment is still playing for their approval. You stopped playing for their approval a long time ago. You just didn't have the language for it yet. You were never weak. You were early.